In the year of our Lord 2023, Alabama has currently come up with a new way to murder people. So they want to try this new idea for capital punishment for an execution. Here in the Associated Press, they say Alabama wants to be the first state to execute a prisoner by making him breathe only nitrogen. It's kind of amazing that we've had all of human history up to this point. Now, 2023, they're like, hey, we found a new way to kill people. Let's do that. They say Alabama is seeking to become the first state to execute a prisoner by making him breathe pure nitrogen. The Alabama Attorney General's office on Friday asked the state Supreme Court to set an execution date for death row inmate Kenneth Eugene Smith, 58 years old. The court filing indicated Alabama plans to put him to death by nitrogen hypoxia, an execution method that is authorized in 3 states but has never been used. Nitrogen hypoxia is caused by forcing the inmate to breathe only nitrogen, depriving them of oxygen and causing them to die. Nitrogen makes up 78% of the air inhaled by humans and is harmless when inhaled with oxygen. While proponents of the new method have theorized it would be painless, opponents have likened it to human experimentation. Alabama authorized nitrogen hypoxia in 2018 amid a shortage of drugs used to carry out lethal injections, but the state has not attempted to use it until now to carry out a death sentence. Oklahoma and Mississippi have also authorized nitrogen hypoxia, but have not used it. The disclosure that Alabama is ready to use nitrogen hypoxia is expected to set off a new round of legal battles over the constitutionality of the method. The Equal Justice Initiative, a legal advocacy group that has worked on death penalty issues, said Alabama has a history of failed and flawed executions and execution attempts, and experimenting with a never-before-used method is a terrible idea. No state in the country has executed a person using nitrogen hypoxia, and Alabama is in no position to experiment with a completely unproven and unused method for executing someone. Alabama attempted to execute Smith by lethal injection last year, but called off the execution because of problems inserting an IV into his veins. It was the state's second such instance within 2 months of being unable to put an inmate to death, and its third since 2018. The day after Smith's aborted execution, Governor Kay Ivey announced a pause on executions to conduct an internal review of lethal injection procedures. The state resumed lethal injections last month. We've actually covered some of these stories that, you have the issue where they can't find the vein, they have to call it off. You also have the issue where the pharmaceutical company that made the 3-drug cocktail, which is used for executions, they stopped making it because it was a European company. And they're like, we don't have the death penalty anywhere over here. We don't agree with this ethically, so we're not going to make this lethal drug cocktail anymore. And so you had all these states scrambling to come up with a new lethal injection cocktail. And so they came up with one, and then there were a number of botched executions where somebody was like convulsing and seizing and foam was coming out of their mouth and they didn't die, and you could tell the heart was still beating, but they were in excruciating pain. It's the clearest violation of the Constitution I've ever seen. Under the Constitution, you have a protection from what's called cruel and unusual punishment. Torturing somebody to death with an experimental drug sounds like it's cruel and unusual. A new execution method here, nitrogen hypoxia, that is by definition unusual. It's never been done before. That's like the textbook definition of unusual. It's not usual, but they're trying to go ahead and proceed with it. Smith was one of 2 men convicted in the 1988 murder for hire slaying of a preacher's wife. The Alabama Attorney General argued it's time to carry out the death sentence. Quote, it is a travesty to Kenneth Smith has been able to avoid his death sentence for nearly 35 years after being convicted of the heinous murder for hire, slaying of an innocent woman. Elizabeth Sennett. Attorney General Steve Marshall said Friday in a statement, Alabama has been working for several years to develop the nitrogen hypoxia execution method, but has disclosed little about its plans. The Attorney General's court filing did not describe the details of how the execution would be carried out. Corrections Commissioner John Hamm told reporters last month that a protocol was nearly complete. I don't necessarily buy that this is definitely painless. Really? How do you know? You get the sense that when we use drug cocktails or like certain kinds of execution methods, you get the sense that it's more for us than it is for them. So in other words, it feels like if you're doing it in a medical setting and you're injecting something, that feels more legit. It feels like you're not actually murdering somebody. Or like the gas chamber, that feels like you're not actually murdering somebody. But the reality is you are murdering somebody. So if you're going to have the death penalty, which I would argue it's unconstitutional, period, that it's not allowed. It shouldn't be allowed under the Constitution because you have protection from cruel and unusual punishment. I would argue that if you're going to do it, it should just be a gunshot right to the head, right? Now, I'm against the death penalty. Like I said, I think it's unconstitutional. So I think there's a solid legal argument to be against it. I also know that studies have shown that 4% of the people who get killed by the death penalty are not guilty. So that means we're murdering 4% innocent people, and that's state-sanctioned murder. I'm not okay with that, right? But like, if you're gonna do it, which you shouldn't, but if you're gonna, it's got to just be a gunshot to the head. Get it over with quickly. But the reason why we wouldn't want to do that in many instances is because then there is no masking what you're actually doing. There is no like, well, it was medical and it was legit. There were some injections. It looked painless. No, it's like you see the blood, you see the brain, you see the results, and it's like, ugh, this is actually ugly. And this doesn't seem like something a civilized society should be doing. This whole conversation is crazy. We're really having this conversation in 2023. And they came up with a new way of killing people in 2023. Should that really be allowed? Should that really be allowed? And all the people who are conservative legal experts, they should all agree with me. Because we have an amendment in the Constitution that says you have a protection from cruel and unusual punishment. I would argue killing somebody is cruel. And I would argue the death penalty is unusual because now the overwhelming majority of the countries in the world don't do it. So it's not usual anymore. We've evolved past this, but we're still doing it. But even if you're a conservative legal type, the plain face reading of the Constitution would be, this isn't allowed. We shouldn't allow this. In fact, there was a brief time, I think in the 1970s, where the Supreme Court said it is unconstitutional to do the death penalty, but then later on they reversed course on that. They shouldn't have reversed course. They shouldn't have done it. And by the way, if you're not going to have the Supreme Court rule the proper way, then pass a national law that bans the death penalty. Because, I mean, it's gone way too far. If you're okay with the death penalty, you're okay with killing 4% of the time innocent people. How many hundreds or thousands of people have been put to death wrongly simply because we have the death penalty? When you could just have life in prison for somebody who's a heinous criminal and not let him out, that's a thing. You could do that. I think that's punishment enough. But no. So, new way of killing people just dropped in 2023. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.